This week, James, John, and Thomas show us how to be brave and courageous as we follow Jesus. James and John were fishermen, but when Jesus called them, they left everything behind. They are bold with their questions and bravery. One time, they asked Jesus for seats of honor in his kingdom. Jesus tells them they don't really know what they're asking for. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? Jesus is referring to a hard life and death. They bravely say yes. And they follow through, courageously spreading the gospel after the resurrection. James takes the first step. He is the first apostle to go out on a missionary journey and to be martyred. His brother John later becomes a pillar of the early church. John works miracles with Peter, teaches whole churches, and writes notes of encouragement. According to tradition, John is the author of the Gospel of John, 3 letters, and the book of Revelation. And John writes about love, the bravest act of all, more than any other writer of the New Testament. Thomas is willing to give everything to God. When Jesus must travel to a dangerous town, he rallies the other disciples to follow him, even if it means they might die. Similar to James and John, Thomas is brave with his questions, asking for proof that Jesus was raised from the dead. We sometimes give him a hard time for doubting, but asking questions is not a bad thing. It leads to greater understanding and is a very brave thing to do. Jesus listens and answers his question, showing Thomas his hands and side. After the resurrection, Thomas takes the gospel to India, converts many, and is martyred for his belief in Jesus. As Christians, we are called to be brave. James, John, and Thomas all take this call seriously, leaving their homes, traveling to new places, and putting their lives on the line for Jesus. But perhaps the bravest act that they did was to love God and love their neighbors, even when it was hard. John's writings about love show exactly how brave God calls us to be when we love others. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. Acts of Christian bravery come from love. Jesus came to earth because he loved us. James and John left their home because they loved Jesus. Thomas followed Jesus into danger because he loved him. And we are called to act bravely when we love others. How do you show love to other people? When is it hard or scary to love people? What could you do to love bravely when it's hard?
Welcome to week 2 crafts for Heroes of the Faith. The first craft activity we're going to do is going to be with your mobile. So what you'll need is your mobile. You'll need 3 fish, 3 pieces of yarn, and some markers. Just like last week, we made 3 fish for the 3 disciples we learned about. We're going to create another fish for the 3 disciples that we learned about this week. Each one of the disciples we learned about this week showed acts of bravery. So we're going to grab a fish, any color, doesn't matter, and we're going to start with disciple number 1, James. J-A-M-E-S. James. On the back of James, we're going to make some symbols so that we can remember his story. James is pretty special. James did some things differently than everyone else. One of the things to remember is that James was the first disciple to head out on missionary trips. So one of the things we might want to add is the ordinal first. So we remember he was the first to go out. James was also the first disciple to be martyred. So he was the first to go out and preach about Jesus, and he was also the first to die for his faith. Another thing to remember about James is he's often seen with a seashell. Because he was the first to go out, my seashell looks a bit like a tooth, but that's okay. Because he was the first to go out, he lived a simple life, and sometimes shells are seen as a simple dish. He was also the first to go out and bring people to the Christian faith. And we know that a shell represents a lot of things in our faith. The third symbol we want to remember is a footstep. I'm gonna make my footstep. Okay. We want to remember that he was one of the first to go out and walk the path that later disciples and later missionaries would follow. When you've got your symbols for James done, you're going to grab your string and hook your James fish, and you're going to add him to your disciple net. Find another spot anywhere on there that you'd like and tie him on. Grab another fish, and we're going to do your next disciple. We're going to go to the opposite end of our disciples, and our second fish is going to be John. J-O-H-N. John. Flip him over and we'll get our symbols. James was the first to go out, preach about Jesus, and James was the first to be martyred. John lived a really long life. John had lots of time to write, talk about Jesus and his miracles, and John is a part of our New Testament. One of the cool things about John is when you see a picture of him, he's usually seen with a very fancy chalice or goblet. I'm going to give mine some rubies. He's often seen with a fancy chalice or goblet, and coming out of it is a snake, a serpent, or a dragon. There was a legend that someone tried to poison him with a cup of poisoned wine. So when you see him, you'll see this little symbol. And actually in our church, he's holding a chalice. This tells the legend that he was poisoned, but that's just a legend. It's just a tradition. John lived a long life and had a long time to talk to everyone about Jesus. The other thing I want you to remember is to add a heart. A lot of the things that John writes about are love, showing love to our neighbors, following the example of love that Jesus set for us. He uses the word love a lot. Add that heart so that you remember that John wrote to us about love. When you've got your symbols, you're going to grab your string, catch your John fish, and add him to your net. The third fish of the day is going to be Thomas. T-H-O-M-A-S. Thomas. We're going to flip them over and we're going to talk a little bit about symbols for Thomas. Thomas did a lot. When we talked about our disciples, one of the things that Thomas did was Thomas asked questions. I want you to make sure you add some question marks. That was a way of showing bravery, was having the courage to ask questions and get a better understanding. Thomas asked questions. A symbol that we see a lot for Thomas is a spear. A spear has a little arrowhead at the top of it and a long stick. That spear fits for two things. It fits for Thomas's martyrdom, but it also fits for the fact that when Jesus was resurrected, Thomas wanted to see the nails in his hands and see where the spear had pierced his side. He questioned and he wanted to understand the resurrection. The third symbol that we often see for Thomas is what's called a carpenter's square. It's a little tool that early carpenters used when they were building to find corners and make sure things were leveled. The reason you see that for Thomas is Thomas was known as a church builder. As he went out and did his missionary work, he built churches in different places. Not the buildings, but he built the community, and they became their own church. So for Thomas, we all often see what's called a carpenter's square. When you've got your symbols done, catch Thomas fish and add them to your net. At this point, you have caught half of your 12 disciples. Welcome to activity number 2 for week 2 of Heroes of the Faith. For this activity, you're going to need some kind of jar. It could be a coffee mug, it could be a jar around the house, some kind of container. You're going to need markers, and you're also going to need to get in your bag, and you're going to have a set of sticks. These are going to be called your bravery sticks. On each one of these sticks, we are going to come up with an activity or way that you can show bravery. Okay. One of the first ways that the disciples showed bravery was to show acts of love towards others. Sometimes we might want to hide that, especially as we get older. We might want to hide how we show love to others. But one of the ways that disciples showed bravery was to show acts of love. So I'm going to write show acts of love on my stick, and I'm going to put it in. If that's the stick I pull out, ways I could show acts of love: give mom or dad a hug. Moms and dads, love your hugs. Give your brother or your sister a chance to control the TV remote. Maybe write a note to grandma, write a note to your neighbor. Show an act of love. It's very, very easy. A second way that disciples showed acts of love were to ask hard questions. It was probably pretty scary for Thomas to ask Jesus about his resurrection. He had seen Jesus die. Ask a hard question. Asking questions is a good thing. Teachers like asking questions. We like kids who ask questions. When you ask a question, you get a better understanding of something. If you have something in your mind that's whirling and you pull this stick, it would be a great time to turn to mom or dad and ask them a question that's in your head. Add that to your jar. Third stick. Something that's very hard for us to do and takes a lot of bravery is to try something for the first time. So on my third stick, I'm going to write that. Try something for the first time. We know that in this week of bravery, we learned about the first disciple to head out on missionary. We learned about the first disciple to be martyred. Those are pretty big things. For your try something for the first time, it could be something as easy as trying a new food. I do not like mushrooms. If I pulled this stick, I could try to eat a mushroom that day. If you're nervous about riding a bike and you pull the stick, that could be what you do for the first time, is try it out. You'll notice you have 2 more sticks. I want you to work with your family to come up with 2 more ways to be brave, and you're gonna put them in the jar. When you get up in the morning, the first thing I want you to do is walk to your jar and pull a stick for the day. And I want you to be brave. I pulled try something new for the first time. So it looks like I'm eating mushrooms tonight.